Well, Panasonic, you finally released some information about the GH6. The question is, does anybody still care? Is anybody waiting for the GH6? Are people still excited about Micro Four Thirds? Is it a viable system? A little bit of background about my background. I do professional videography. I shoot a lot of live events, live streaming. I also do a lot of promo stuff for businesses, nonprofits, the occasional music video and short film. Those stuff I usually do for pro bono with people whom I know, just for funsies. And my primary camera for professional video use for the past 2 years or so has been the Panasonic GH6, which you can't see because my lighting is bad. So not only do I use the Panasonic GH6, but pretty much everyone who I work for, people who hire me to shoot with them or for them, their primary cameras are the Panasonic GH5. For people doing professional video work, these cameras have been and will remain completely viable and relevant for the type of work that we do. So that's kind of where my perspective is on the GH6. I mean, I know there's a lot of people on YouTube who just because Donna did it or something are going to full frame, or the Sony a7S III or the Canon blah blah blah, and that's fine because those are sort of like two different worlds. And I'm talking to the people who are doing professional video kind of on a smaller scale, a little bit lower budget, but it's not necessarily just about being low budget. It's also about running a business and not spending money that you don't need to spend. And there's nothing wrong with all these full frame cameras. They're fantastic. But there is a place still for cameras that can do a whole lot for less money. Now, let's just talk about what we know about the GH6 based on what Panasonic announced. There'll be room for some speculation because there really aren't a whole lot of details yet that have been confirmed. So basically what they confirmed is that this camera, the GH6, is basically the Micro Four Thirds version of the S1H. That's my perspective, or that's my take on it. So 5.7K internal recording, up to 60 frames per second, 10-bit, up to 60 frames per second in 4K, 10-bit 422, and then 4K up to 120 frames per second, 10-bit. So there's a lot of sort of like reading between the lines with what is and what isn't said. But again, all those specs really line up really well with what the S1H does. You can shoot 6K and 5.7K internal in the S1H in 10-bit 420, but you can only shoot 10-bit 422 internally at 4K. They didn't mention anything about autofocus. They didn't mention anything about batteries or internal recording media. They didn't mention anything about external recording options. They didn't mention anything about raw recording. Color me a little bit underwhelmed, a little bit let down by the announcement thus far. Now, with that being said, there is a lot of time left between now and the end of the year when this camera could be launched. So there's a lot of room for other things that could be a little bit more mind-blowing. The GH6 doesn't have to be world-beating in order for it to be a viable professional video camera. I think in order to entice the YouTube world back into, or to be interested in it, or to adopt it over something like the a7S III, it kind of does have to exceed the a7S III in some way. And based off of these specs that have been announced, it doesn't really in any way exceed the a7S III. So what I'm hoping for future announcements to come with this camera is maybe some sort of like computational processing-based improvements that will allow the Micro Four Thirds sensor and allow those smaller sensor limitations to be overcome in some ways. Something like what you can do with smartphones with that computational photography and videography, where you can combine multiple exposures and increase the dynamic range. That would be something that would, I think, really entice people. But just based on what they've announced so far, it's a good camera, potentially a good camera, very much on par with the S1H. Where it could beat the S1H is with that smaller sensor. You should get a faster readout, so it should have much improved rolling shutter. Then again, the a7S III has a really fast readout for a full frame camera, or for any camera, and it is a full frame camera. So then you're just still kind of matching what's already been done by Sony with a full frame camera. And just raw specs wise, I know there's going to be a lot of things that you can do on the GH camera that you can't do with the a7S III, like open gate anamorphic, so you get a 4:3 mode with the existing cameras, which I anticipate the GH6 will continue for shooting anamorphic or even just shooting 4:3. They're also going to have waveforms and vector scopes that the existing cameras already have. The GH5S has timecode sync, so you can sync this up with other recording devices. I would anticipate some version of the GH6 will have that as well. We already have full-size HDMI going back to the GH5. Will they add SDI? I doubt it based on form factor, but we don't know. And they also announced with the GH5 Mark II the ability to charge the camera via the USB-C port, which you couldn't do on the older GH5s. So that'll be something I would anticipate with the GH6 as well. But these are all kinds of things that have been around and been available on cameras going back for years now. We also don't know anything about the EVF or the LCD screen. You know, they need to be really good or really exceptional in some way to differentiate the cameras. I mean, what is it going to be that's going to differentiate this camera or make it stand out? We also don't know anything about image quality. We are getting a resolution bump above current Micro Four Thirds cameras, something like 24 megapixels. Yeah, we don't know anything about dynamic range, low light performance, dual gain ISO. A lot of room for speculation, but I'm just hoping for something, just something that really wows people. Otherwise, it's going to be a good camera. And I think for people who are on Micro Four Thirds, who have been shooting with GH5s, GH4s, GH5Ss, who maybe have, you know, are invested in Micro Four Thirds lenses. I only have 2 anymore. I've sold all my other ones. Or are probably adapting Canon EF or maybe Nikon F with the Metabone Speed Booster. You know, you're still going to be able to use all of those lenses going forward. So that's an important consideration. So nothing I've seen so far is going to make me want to run out and buy the GH6 the day of, or even pre-order or anything like that. I'm still going to wait and see what else is going to be included in the camera. We also didn't really talk about autofocus, but for me in my situation, I don't even have any lenses that are going to be compatible with autofocus anyway. So that's not something that I particularly care about, but I know almost everybody else does. So the bottom line, just to wrap this up, cautiously optimistic that Panasonic still has something up its sleeve, because what they did give in terms of details was pretty minimal. So hopefully there's something exciting that they are holding back on. All right, appreciate it. Thanks for watching this video, and we'll see you in another one.